Number 1. My very first patient in Afghanistan was a 10-month girl. The father brought her to our gate asking for help. We checked her out and she is literally missing all of the skin from the shoulder blade to the waist on her back left side. She's literally burned to the bone. Dad tells Terp that she tripped and got cut up by gravel. Clearly she is burned. I can still smell it to this day. I can remember the screech she made, the charred skin I had to remove while that asshole just sat in the corner. There's nothing I can do to right the situation other than what I can do for her. That single moment definitely set the tempo for the following 9 months. Number 2. I'm not a retired soldier, but a Naval Hospital corpsman with a Marine unit who deployed to Sangin Valley, Afghanistan in 2012. I've seen a lot of casualties in my short time in the Navy, but no amount of love tissue training could prepare me for my first no-shit trauma patient. It wasn't even one of my Marines who got hit. I was chilling at the battalion aid station with a group of other corpsmen getting our shit together and talking about who would survive a zombie apocalypse, when we got a call that we would have a patient coming in. This was about 1 week into the deployment. We had just gotten to the FOB and the majority of us were pushing out to patrol bases the next few days. I was one of the most senior corpsmen there, so I was in charge of leading the team in treating this patient. We had a PA there, but he was more interested in sleeping and trusted our medical knowledge to be able to treat this patient properly. When the Vic came in, I ran outside to get a good look at the patient before he came in, and I was not expecting what I saw. He was an older gentleman, probably around 70, hard to tell, and he had stepped on an IED and had bilateral above-the-knee amputations. Tourniquets had been applied and bleeding controlled by the time he got into the base. My team attached monitors, applied secondary tourniquets, and got IV access while I secured the airway. After what seemed like seconds, we had finished our first and second assessment and were waiting in the bird when the ProPack stopped reading any vitals. I remember looking down at the man and seeing that there wasn't any life left in his eyes. We attempted CPR for a few cycles, but without blood products it was useless. I called it. We were removing all of the interventions we had done when we rolled him over, and I noticed a small incision below his buttock. And above where the tourniquet was applied, there was a small slice where some shrapnel had flown up and severed his femoral. This was my team I was supposed to lead, and I killed this patient because I couldn't get level-headed enough to remember the simple things I learned in CTM/TCCC. I have had many trauma patients since that day, but this one sticks to me the most. I have stumbled upon shacks full of dead and dying people, had friends get shot and blown up, but my first casualty haunts me every night. I have since used this particular patient as a learning mechanism now that I am a seasoned instructor, so that hopefully my students don't make the same mistake I did. Number 3. I lived in a safe house in the Kabul Green Zone a couple of years ago, working on ISAF HQ but moving throughout Kabul every day. The street from my compound to ISAF was filled with pedestrian traffic, and these kids would try to sell foreigners whatever trinkets they could. I got to know them since I was there every day. I got them clothes for winter, random snacks from the chow hall, and we played Angry Birds together. They spoke with me, brought me scarves I asked for, and little gifts every once in a while. They also kept the other peddlers away. One day a kid, 12 to 14 years old from elsewhere, came to the area with a bomb in his backpack. He intended to kill foreigners moving in the area or target one of the compounds. The local kids noticed him and apparently told him to get lost, and he detonated his bomb. 4 kids were killed along with the bomber and a couple of adults. A dozen or so injured maybe. I knew each one of the kids. Kushi, a little girl who was learning to skate. Nawab, who, in my view of things, looked to have had a hard crush on one of the other girls who was killed. Another boy had a brother a year or so older who looked just like him. I saw the one killed and saw the other a week later trying to sell things again. It freaked me out. I was at the site of the bombing not 30 minutes before I felt it while inside ISAF. Seeing the bodies after was a mistake. I didn't need to be there. I walked by the site every day until I left that base. The night of the attack, I could still smell the blood and the damp smell of wet Kabul dust mixed together. Every day I went by, I could see their bodies and the surrounding gore in my head. I have seen the aftermath of VBIEDs in Iraq where hundreds were killed, but something about knowing those faces so well. Kids that would have done well if not born into such a backward shithole. It didn't help that right after my ex told me I deserved to see those things since I chose to be there again. This is where the bomb went off only a few days before it actually happened. The boy is Nawab, oldest of those killed. I don't remember the girl's name, but she is the one Nawab liked. I always loved seeing them together because it just seems so wonderful to see a couple of kids flirting with one another in a place where you just don't expect that. The bomber detonated in front of those steps by the pole, and both metal gates on the sides of the shop were completely shredded by the blasts. Number 4. I haven't told anyone this story as it's something I'm not comfortable talking about face to face, but I feel it's probably something people should know and think about at the least. I was deployed to a place called the Triangle of Death in Iraq in a little town called Yusufaya. We had been there for 6 months with a lot of intense fighting and were set to rotate to southern Iraq in a much less active spot. We were set to be replaced by the 502nd IR, part of the 101st Airborne. They had been a large part of the initial invasion of Iraq against Saddam's forces, but this was 2005 and was a much different war. When you transition units in the military, there is a period where you integrate. Front seat/back seat rides, where you show the incoming unit your current operations. I happened to be at an outpost by one of the 2 remaining bridges across the Euphrates River when this started. We tried to caution them and show them the ropes, but they didn't want to listen to any of us. They kept saying, "We have a destiny," along with other hyper-aggressive statements. They didn't even seem to see the Iraqis as human beings. They were just like, "We're gonna fuck this place up and fuck them, rape, kill, pillage, and burn." Across the street from this particular outpost was an Iraqi guy and his family who owned the small farm around the outpost. They had been really good to us, pointing out IEDs on roads as well as running and grabbing us food and supplies when we couldn't get any. For example, our supply truck was destroyed by an IED one time, so all we had were MREs to eat. We talked to the farmer and gave him a shopping list and money, and he bought us food at the local marketplace. He was a great guy and did stuff like that for us all the time. We took the 502nd guys on a foot patrol and the farmer came out of his house, greeting us as he usually did, making his way towards us. We waved and started talking to him. When he went to shake the hand of some of the 502nd privates, the private just hauled off and punched him in the mouth, shouting obscenities. Our platoon sergeant restrained him and sent him back to the outpost with my sergeant, and I escorted him while he tried to placate the farmer. We took that private to his sergeant, who congratulated him. When our platoon sergeant got back, he tore them a new one, but they didn't seem to care. I wasn't privy to the conversation between my platoon sergeant and his, but it didn't seem to have an impact either. Their attitude persisted until we finally left to our new location. They murdered that farmer's family a few months after we left and raped his daughter. As if this wasn't enough, a few months prior to this, I had been injured when my truck rolled over during a firefight, maybe 200 meters from where the killings took place. I had to be medevaced to Baghdad, where I recovered for a few weeks. When the truck rolled over, I lost my wallet in the dirt out there in what we call Iraqi moon dust. which is a powdery silt type soil you find all over. Flash forward to a week or two after the killings took place. I receive a package from Sergeant Green. It's my wallet mailed March 12, 2006, the same day as the killings. I recognize it's highly unlikely it happened just like this, but I can't help but wonder if they found my wallet on their way to commit the murders, or even if they mailed it just before it happened. I'm not a religious person, but I like to think that this was perhaps the universe's way of trying to remind them of the front seat, back seat period with our unit where we had a simple message for them. Treat people with respect and like human beings. That's all they want. I still have the wallet. I've had it since high school. Old Calvin Klein leather wallet my sister gave me. It reminds me of the farmer and his family. I can't help but wonder if maybe we had been more focused on getting our message across to that 500-second group if this could have been avoided. Maybe we were in too much of a hurry to leave to safer territory that we neglected something that might have made a difference. We even had the option to volunteer to stay at Yusufaya with the 502nd if we wanted, but I declined. Not out of fear of combat, as I was comfortably numb to it at that point, but because I just wanted to go relax and was homesick. It makes me think that I could have made a difference but didn't because of something simplistically selfish. It's probably silly to think that and perhaps a bit cliche, but it is what I think. Number 5. Back in 2010, northwest of Sangin, Afghanistan, I was the corpsman for my group of 4 Marines. We specialized in JTACs and were supporting the Georgian army in creating a new patrol base. We get to the area where the base is going to be built and camp out in our trucks until the bulldozers finish building the walls and filling up HESCO barriers. Around the second day, near noon, we hear an explosion and see in the distance a large smoke cloud. We radio to see if there were any friendly forces near that area, but no coalition forces were near us. We then mount up to go check it out, and as we near the site, we see 2 adult figures running around a van that hit an IED. As we pull up, there is a 6-passenger Afghan van that looks like it hit an IED. This van was demolished and it was charred and the engine was on fire. As we dismount, the 2 make adults run to us, but our interpreter was there and told us they were brothers asking for help, because one of the brothers had 4 daughters in the van with them when they hit the IED. We rush to the van and there is still smoke everywhere, but we start pulling on the rear driver door and I can hear one of the daughters still screaming inside. As we pry the door open, we look inside, and I will never forget what I saw. Inside was all charred and smoke was still coming out of the van, and in the seats was what remained of the 4 daughters. 3 of the daughters were torn apart by the explosion with limbs and body parts everywhere. The 4th was still holding one of her sister's amputated hand while her other hand was pressed on her side. The blast had amputated her lower left leg going up to her pelvis. She was trying to scream, but she was already losing too much blood, making her lose consciousness. We pulled her out and I got to work trying to stop her from bleeding out, but I could only keep her alive for 15 more minutes. The father and uncle held her hand as she never woke up from losing consciousness. Me and my Marine started collecting the body parts of the other daughters so the father and brother could bury their remains. Their ages were 4, 5, and 6. Fuck. Number 6. I responded to several complex suicide bombings which resulted in hundreds of casualties. And while they bother me, they weren't the worst thing. There was a guy in my unit. His name was Charles. He had come from a really messed up background but wore his heart on his sleeve. He got all of us a copy of Halo while we were downrange so we could have LAN parties when we had the time. He wasn't my best friend, but he was a good friend and a battle buddy. He was going through some rough times with the deployment and other personal things, and someone caught him with his loaded pistol in his mouth. Instead of sending him home, our unit demoted him, gave him extra duty, and took away his weapons for a few months. After he was given his weapons back, he resumed missions with us. We used to sit on the blue deck on CNS and smoke and talk about life. He told me that his fiancée had ended things with him and he was taking it pretty hard. He told me specifically that he wrote her a letter and if she didn't take him back, he would kill himself. I hadn't yet been through any kind of suicide prevention training, so I wasn't sure how to respond. I told him that there are better ways to deal with this situation, but I didn't do enough. The last conversation that we had was about pulling the trigger on competence. The last thing that he told me was that he didn't mind returning the fire if he needed to, but if he ever saw someone killing an innocent person, then he would stop them himself. That night, he put a 3-round burst into his head. Not a day goes by I don't think about him and think about how I could have helped him, but didn't. We all knew he was suicidal and none of us did a damn thing about it. Daily, I think about him. Why didn't I do more? What could I have done better? I'm sorry for not doing enough, man. I just didn't think you would do it. Number 7. The year was 2001. I was stationed 2 kilometers from Ramallah near a roadblock known as the Chicken. That night I was on sergeant duty, meaning I was tasked with driving the shifts around bringing food to the roadblock. Around 21 hours or so, I take my driver and Humvee and go deliver food to the roadblock. It's already pitch black, the driver only knows Russian, and everything is totally quiet. We reach the roadblock and before we manage to unload the food, we see a car approaching very slowly, basically rolling towards us with the engine and lights on. We all got very tense and loaded our guns and got behind the cinder blocks. The car keeps rolling and we aim our guns at it. It rolls very slow and we can make out that someone is inside. Everything is pitch black and dead quiet. And then the car bumps into some telephone pole nearby and halts. We walk slowly towards the car, rifles ready. As we near it, we notice bullet holes. Dozens and dozens of them everywhere. We look into the car. A bearded man is leaning on the steering wheel. He is covered in blood. His shirt totally red, his chest on the wheel, and his head on the dash. He is as dead as he could be. A woman who is also soaking red is in the seat next to him, sort of curled and also very dead. I was just bringing the food and now this nightmare. The car itself is covered in blood. All of the windows riddled with bullet holes. Blood is oozing from under the doors like in a Stephen King movie. We look at the back seat, everyone very tense. We don't know where the car came from and we didn't hear any shooting. But it couldn't be from far away as the roads are curvy and he wouldn't make it without falling in one of the valleys. The back seat. There are 3 kids. I don't remember if they were boys or girls. I just remember 3 little corpses covered in red and lumped together like 3 little sacks of potatoes. They still had their seatbelts on. We freaked out a little and scream into the radio for medics and backup. I grab one of the guys from the roadblock, throw out the food from the Humvee and tell the driver to slam it, going the direction the car came from. After a couple of minutes, the driver says something, but he only speaks Russian. We keep going. We reach a big curve and assume the driver couldn't have made it if the shooting was before the curve. So we jump out and start shooting light bombs, trying to find any signs, broken glass, etc. We see nothing, so we shoot at the hills. Maybe someone is hiding and this will get him to shoot at us. No use. We spend some hours on the hills shooting light bombs and at the rooks. After the debriefing, we found out that the driver saw some car parts on the road and probably also the attackers, but that he couldn't communicate it to us. Fuck. Number 8. Marine here. I've only shared this with 1, maybe 2 people. We were on patrol with another squad in Ramadi, Iraq. We were about a half a mile ahead of our other squad when we heard the deafening rip of an IED. It was close. Too close. Our walkies went off like fireworks. First squad was hit. They got the radioman. He was alive, but their comm was down. The radioman from my squad and I just started running towards the location of the blast. I'll never forget feeling so alone. My 22-year-old body running as fast as it could, with a 19-year-old radioman in tow. We weren't even looking for threats, we just needed to get to first squad. It was absolutely terrifying. I just remember, if we're too slow, someone's gonna die. When we finally arrived, the corpsman was already working on first squad's radioman. He was a bloody mess, literally. My radioman was finally able to call the courts for medevac. The first squad eventually grabbed bloody radioman and dragged him to a nearby courtyard since we were all sitting ducks. Within moments, as we usually did, we took to the roofs. Better vantage. As medevac came in to collect radioman, boom, secondary IED goes off right where we were caring for him. Movies depict the fog of war, but I remember going numb and slamming my M16A4 on that rooftop. I was mad, sad, and confused all at once. I instantly picked my rifle back up and began to scan the area. I looked southbound through my advanced combat optic gun sight, and I spotted a kid, maybe 11 to 14. He was holding a phone. Mobile and cordless phones were the triggers of choice for IEDs. Unconsciously, I snapped the safety off and drew every bit of slack out of that trigger. That sear/hammer was one breath away from sending a 5.56mm through that little fucker's chest from 150 yards. I remember grasping for breath and snapping the safety back on. Did this kid pull the trigger? Maybe. Will you kill a kid? No. Is radioman still alive? Yes. We need to get the fuck out of here. I still hate this story. Number 9. I was deployed to Panway, Afghanistan in 2010 to 2011, and we were the first American soldiers on that ground since Special Forces and Rangers occupied it in 2006, which was taken back over by Taliban very quickly after they left. We got called out to search for a dead enemy that a Predator drone shot earlier in the night. We found him and called it up as normal. As we were heading back to the patrol base, the sun was starting to rise and we were all deadbeat tired at this time and just ready to get in our bunks to catch some rest. We operated in strikers and the lead vehicle hit an enormous IED that made the front 4 tires fly at least 200 feet away. We have hit several IEDs up to this point, so we proceeded with protocol, radioing up to the downed vehicle for any sustained injuries. No one answered, so a team including myself dismounted to provide support. As we walk to the vehicle, you get that gut feeling that you just know it is bad. Really bad. We sweep the area quickly for any more secondary IEDs and then start doing our best to get inside and help everyone. We pull the passengers in the back out who were unconscious and bleeding from the head. The driver was jammed in between a metal sheet and unconscious as well. We had people immediately start to treat the passengers while we continued to get the driver out. Finally it budges and we free him. His entire lower body felt almost like a bowl of jello. No bones keeping it intact. The medevacs were already well on their way, but we all knew there wasn't much they could do at this point. Medevacs finally arrived and escorted them back to KAF. A few hours later we made it back to base and no one slept. Sitting in silence, waiting for any updates or news. Finally, around dinner, we heard something. We got the breaking news that the driver's pulse stopped on the helicopter to KAF. The 3 passengers in the back suffered from traumatic brain injury. I still keep in contact with them and they will never be the same. They have a short-term memory and can barely read or talk to anyone. The driver was only 19 years old. A young, quiet, naive kid that you would never expect anything to happen to. I've experienced many things that I will never forget or tell anyone in person, but this really hit me the hardest. This was in the month of November, which is partially the reason I even decided to type this out, honestly. I lost 3 close friends in this month, and it is extremely difficult every time it comes around. Number 10. I still have nightmares because of this story. I was with the 3rd Battalion 5th Marines during the Second Battle of Fallujah. This was in the closing weeks of the battle. We were clearing a small sector of the city that had been hit by friendly artillery the previous night. Smoke and rubble. Nothing unordinary for an artillery shelling. We came across a couple of insurgents holding out in a small hut, surrounded by a couple of bodies. We figured, hey, the shelling must have taken out some of the stragglers that were unlucky enough to be outside. We secured the hut relatively easily. We were beginning to search those bodies that were outside when we saw what had really happened to them. They were burnt, not a normal kind of burn. Their faces looked like they were melted. Any uncovered skin was burnt and mangled. We had seen burn victims numerous times before, but none like this. 2 of my squad crew threw up. A 3rd one had a panic attack. Then we came across one in particular. We kept checking bodies and I turned one over that had been face down. It's a sight that no amount of alcohol will ever let me forget. His eyes were gooey and a part of his right eye had stuck to the ground when I flipped him over. His face was covered in blisters and melted skin. Patches of his beard were gone and bloody parts of his skull were showing where his ear should have been. It got even worse after that, but I don't want to recount it. I was still there until the end of the battle, when the Iraqis took over security of the city. My squad never really talked about what happened. We kept clearing parts of the city and we never had another encounter like that. There were whispers here and there that we had used WP to shell the city insurgents, and the media went apeshit over it. It wasn't until the US officially admitted to it that we fully understood what had happened to those men we found. I was shipped home after my tour and got discharged with PTSD. I have a family now, but I still see that face when I close my eyes. This is the first and last time I will ever talk about it.